Good morning. The coronavirus has affected all of our lives. Here at TV6, steps have been taken to keep employees safe. Among a number of other things, that means we won't have a guest live in the studio today. And in the weeks ahead, instead we'll be looking at some moments from the past. Today we have some excerpts from 3 earlier interviews that I think you'll enjoy. It starts right now.
From TV6, this is The Ryan Report. Here's your host, Don Ryan.
Well, you know, a little over a year ago, I really enjoyed talking with our next guest because he brought back some memories for me. While I wasn't a ski jumper, it was big in Ishpeming when I grew up, and Willie Erickson was one of a group of men from Iron Mountain and Ishpeming who brought ski jumping glory to Upper Michigan. I asked Willie how old he was when he started jumping.
Well, you know, back in my time, there wasn't much else to do other than ski jump.
Right.
So I was a little kid, so I started in the junior programs, probably 8, 9 years old, and worked my way up into the junior program and into the senior program and so on and so forth.
You know, and I think back to my days in Ishpeming, although I wasn't a ski jumper. You know, occasionally some kid would have a little hill in his yard and he'd make his own little bump that he could probably do 2 or 3 feet off of.
That's exactly how it was. At Christmas time, we used to gather up all the Christmas trees, go out in the neighborhood, anything that looked like a little hill, we'd build a ski jump on it. And we started that way, and it was always a great thing. And we thought as young kids, what else can you do? We didn't have all the fancy smartphones and things that kids use today, and so it was just the natural thing to do.
You know, when you were a kid, was there a jumper or two who really inspired you?
Don, there were a lot of them. Back in my time, I'm talking about the 50s and 60s and so on and so forth, but before that even, as kids, if you had any potential at all as a ski jumper, you always had somebody to shine up to. And I remember as a kid, 9, 10, 12, 14, 15 years old, shining up to guys like the Beatles brothers, Wilbur Rasmussen. We had a group of Olympians that were right here in the UP, between Iron Mountain and Ishpeming. Art Devlin, Art Tokel out east, out west was Keith Wegeman, some of the big names, Arnson Samuelsson. But we always had somebody to look up to, and that was always our shining light. We wanted to be like them.
You know, how old were you when you took your first jump off Pine Mountain?
I was 15 years old. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was just an exciting thing, and I got to say to you, Don, that back in those days we had to walk up the entire hill, the landing and the tower. And nowadays it's a little different.
Quite a work. Were you apprehensive on that first jump?
No, not at all. It was. I think I took 12 jumps that day, so that can tell you something about it.
With ski jumpers, fear can't be a factor, can it?
No, fear is out the door. I mean, I think you just concentrate on what you got to do, and that's what it was all about.
Probably the most serious condition you have to deal with is wind, right?
Wind is always a condition you have to deal with, and of course, it's back in the day, it wasn't monitored like it is today. Today they have ways of communicating with wind speed meters and so on and so forth. So it's more controlled today, so they don't jump in entirely heavy winds like we did years ago.
Were there ever times when you were a little apprehensive about?
Absolutely, absolutely, and I can recall a lot of good competitions that ended up during windstorms even, but it was very successful.
You know, we think about ski jumping here, you know, Ishpeming and Iron Mountain, but at least back then, and maybe today, there was really kind of a circuit around the Midwest and the country, wasn't there?
Well, if you want to go back, for instance, like we're going to talk about the Olympics, back in the time from the 40s all the way up until 1988, between Iron Mountain and Ishpeming, we always had members on the U.S. Olympic or world team. And today, of course, we don't have any jumpers at all in either place, and it's. But the sport has changed a lot since my time. I'll say that.
A lot of attention is paid to the Olympics, and I want to talk more about that. But you know, in skiing, there are a lot of really important events. I know you were in '56 the junior national champion, and that was in Leavenworth, Washington. And '57 the U.S. national Class B champion. And in '59 you were the national champion.
That's correct. That's correct. I was a 3-time U.S. national champion. And the only reason I probably didn't gather the 4th one, veterans class, was I retired before that.
Okay. and then you were on the 1960 Olympic team. That was in Squaw Valley. How was that experience?
Well, it was a great experience. Back in those times, every 4 years there was either an Olympic or World Championships, which was called the FIS. Okay. And so they alternated between them. Every 2 years there was a world meet, like Olympics or a World Cup meet. Okay. So back in those days, it was always, I remember the first time going to Europe, 1958 for the World Championships, and that really got you worked up about ski jumping because you're competing against the best in the world. And then of course Squaw Valley, coming back to home turf, was always nice. And but we skied. We were fortunate. That's one thing, that ski jumping being an amateur sport back then, which was strictly amateur, not like it is today, because today ski jumpers can make a pretty good living doing their sport.
And you mentioned some of the names, but some that I had came back to me as I was thinking. One was Gene Kotlarek from Duluth.
Gene, we just lost Gene. He just
really?
passed away. Yeah, but Gene, I would have to say, in the early '60s, from Squaw Valley up until '64, Gene was probably our top skier. He was our top skier, and I would have to say that he was probably the best American born ski jumper that we've ever had.
And I remember the name John Belfance.
John Belfance. Those two were the premier jumpers we had in the early '60s. John is gone also. He passed away some years ago. But they were actually the two best American-born ski jumpers that we've ever had, in my opinion.
You mentioned some of the Ishpeming jumpers. Also, I don't think we mentioned Jumpin' Joe Perot.
Joe Perot was a great guy. I'll never forget him in 1949 when he came to Pine Mountain and beat the world champion Matti Pietikainen from Finland. Joe beat him, and that was history, boy, I'll tell you.
Wasn't Joe, or was it Rudy Mackey, who was the first to jump 300 feet at Pine Mountain?
Rudy was the first one to bail out 300 feet, official jump, marked jump, and that was in the 1955 championships game.
As people watch, we tend to put a lot of emphasis on the distance, but there's more to jumping than just distance, isn't there?
Yeah, there certainly is. Although in today's world, they've probably taken, back in my time when we look at I remember when Antti Hyväläinen, 1956 Olympic medal winner, came here to Ishpeming and to Iron Mountain. I mean, that was poetry in motion. Everything was boom, boom, boom. It was just poetry in motion. Like I said, today, the styles have changed, the equipment has changed, hill profiles have changed. So it's more of a wilder sport. Skis are wide. It's not as graceful as it was back years ago, where we held the skis together and you never moved a muscle. Today they're kind of flying. It's called ski flying, more or less. And so it's not as spectacular in my opinion, but they're jumping further. And basically that's what it's all about.
Willie Erickson talking about the heyday of ski jumping in Upper Michigan. I'll be back to talk about the Grand Hotel in just 2 minutes. The Grand Hotel on Mackinac Island is one of the most unique places in Michigan. So it was a real pleasure for me to talk with the man whose family made it what it is today. Dan Musser is the third generation in his family to run the Grand Hotel, and I asked him what he saw as his highest priority as the man in charge.
Yes, it did, and it's interesting that like the Canadian hotels, the railroad company and the two steamship companies that built the hotel really had no desire to be in the hotel business per se. They just wanted to create a new spot to haul people to. And so I guess fortunately or unfortunately for our family, they got out of it pretty quick. Then we entered eventually in the 1934, my great uncle got full ownership.
And at that time, you had mentioned, I think the last time we talked, that for much of its life it didn't make any money. So he must have had some good expectations for the hotel.
It struggled really until after the Second World War. He did a couple things that I think changed the projection of the viability of the business. And one was he was able to see that travel was going to change after the war, that with cars that worked, roads that were passable, that the idea of these wealthy individuals coming from Chicago and Grand Rapids and Cincinnati coming up with their staff and their steamer trumps for the season, that kind of travel was going to end with airplane travel and cars that worked, and it was going to shrink. And so he saw an opportunity that others didn't. And he also started taking conventions at that time, and all of his peers from around the country said, "You're crazy, Stuart. You're going to scare away that great old guest that comes for the summer." And he could see that great old guest, which they were, that type of travel was going to go away. And so a lot of those groups that he booked right after the war were fortunate enough to still serve today and really form kind of the backbone of our business. And we would be hard-pressed to be viable without those.
What do you see as your highest priority for you personally?
Maintaining and getting the best possible staff we can. In recent years, we use about half of our staff are foreign nationals. And the current administration has been very difficult to deal with that, even though the president uses the program at his Mar-a-Lago hotel, which I think we all know he loves and
Right.
cherishes. So we're working through that, and fortunately we're fully complemented with our staff this year. But looking ahead, we have some headwinds that I'm going to address.
Yeah, that really has to be one of the major challenges. I was looking just for the fun of it. The total population of Mackinac Island, Mackinac City, and St. Ignace is less than 4,000 people. And in a conversation, we decided that they employ almost that many people in the hospitality industry. And of course, that 4,000 number includes babies and retirees.
Exactly.
So
Well, there's about 500 year-round residents on Mackinac. Okay. We employ 750. So even if we employed everyone from baby to senior citizen,
right.
we still wouldn't have enough. Yeah.
And I do recall, I think, from a previous conversation that you mentioned you have more employee rooms than you have guest rooms.
We have about 600 employee rooms and 393 guest rooms.
Wow.
Which is kind of when I go to industry meetings around the country, I kind of throw that out there and they'll look at me.
No one else has something
No.
like that. You had mentioned, your uncle kind of being a trailblazer in the idea of conventions and things.
Mm-hmm.
I assume those are still very important to you and to the Grand Hotel.
They're just almost 60% of our business, and obviously, and also come at the shoulder seat at the beginning and the end of the season that we'd be hard pressed to find, the individual traveler coming. So it's really vital to our business,
Right.
and a lot of those kind of an offshoot of if someone comes up for their business meeting, then they might come back later in the summer with their family or spouse.
As you set out to make this work, you face some unique logistical problems being a very large hotel on an island that doesn't allow any motor vehicle traffic. What are the challenges that presents?
I've never known anything else, so to
No.
me it's normal. But yes, we have refrigerator trucks coming every morning at 5 o'clock from St. Ignace to the island, and then kind of my arrangement with the various companies, the dray companies, that we get kind of favored nation status, and that our stuff gets off first and it goes up the hill first, and then everyone else kind of gets serviced, and that's been a big help. And also bringing the refrigerated trucks to the island, that's been over a decade now, but that was a breakthrough, and that we can keep it refrigerated to the last possible moment, put it right on the dray with covered blankets, either hot or cold, and up to the hotel, and that's been a godsend.
And just so people don't misunderstand, those trucks aren't driving on the island; they're just
No,
parked on the dock.
They park on the dock, which is owned by the Iron Line, and they can do that legally on the island. They just couldn't drive onto the city street. Then there would be a problem.
One of the things that people probably don't realize is the efforts you've gone through to actually make some changes, to add some capacity, I guess, and yet maintain the historic charm. That has to be very challenging.
There's a fine line there between, I think, improving and making this iconic structure better and meet the needs of the traveling public of today, but also keeping in mind that it is an iconic image and structure, and we have to be mindful of that. And we have added in recent years cupolas on the 4th floor that originally were on the 3rd floor of the original hotel.
Okay.
And so if you look at old photos and you look at the current hotel, you almost don't even realize what you're looking at, there's another floor there. And so we've tried to be sensitive that way in all areas. But we've added TVs, we've added Wi-Fi, we've done some things
The
that
things you have to
Yeah.
do to stay. Yeah. Do you ever get concerned about maintaining the allure of Mackinac Island itself? Are there ever any challenges there?
Well,
Do you all get along, let's put it that way, the residents, the businesses, the
I
local
think-
and state government?
I think there's a healthy competition between all of us, and yet we all know what makes Mackinac special, and it's not any one of us. The Fort is a big part of that. Mackinac Carriage Tours is a big part of that. Grand Hotel's a big part of that, as well as the fudge shops are. And I think, like I said, I think there's a healthy competition between all of us, and that's good. But also there's respect for what makes Mackinac so special. And I think as long as we maintain that, which we've been pretty good at it so far, I'd like to think we can continue that.
Well, since that interview, the Musser family has sold the Grand Hotel to a larger hotel group. They say things will remain the same. Let's hope that's true. I'll be back to talk about baseball after this break. I miss a lot of things with all that has occurred because of the coronavirus, and one of them is baseball. So I thought we could spend a few minutes today looking back at a conversation I had with one of the great Detroit Tigers pitchers from the past. John Hiller was primarily a reliever, but he also started some games back in the days when pitchers threw a lot of complete games.
We did, and actually it's my very first 3 games that I started, and I only started because we had a fellow, Earl Wilson, was in the rotation. He was injured, and I was a relief pitcher, never started, and all of a sudden Mayo Smith came to me and said, we're going to put you in a rotation. So from going to pitching 1 and 2 innings, all of a sudden, well, I pitched a complete game, shutout the first game, complete game, shutout the second game, and in the third game I gave up a run in the 9th inning, and I didn't quite get a complete game. They brought in relief pitchers at that. Shortly after that, I had a bad game, and then I was back in the bullpen because Earl got thing. But so I was pitching actually as a closer from the 7th inning on. Nowadays it's 1 inning and out.
And when you say closer, they hadn't discovered the closer back in your area yet, have they?
No, well, after I had my heart attack, I played about 4 years. Before I had my heart attack. I missed a year and a half, and then Billy Martin was very instrumental in getting me back, and came back after not pitching in a year and a half, never facing a batter, and all of a sudden I'm in Chicago on the mound, and Dick Allen hit a home run off me, and pitched pretty good that day, pitched 3 innings, didn't walk anybody, and from that day on I was a closer for the next 8 years. So, yeah.
I just want to read a few stats. You know, when you pitched for the Tigers, you pitched over 1,200 innings, 13 complete games, and you pitched a lot of relief ball, really. Left with an ERA of 2.83, which is great. Had over 1,000 strikeouts. So you knew what you were doing.
Well, I guess so. I don't know, crazy left-hander. I grew up in the era again. Put me in. My thing was pitcher. Didn't say relief pitcher, starting pitcher, middle closer. It just said pitcher. So there was times when I might have been in relief for 4 months, and then Billy Martin might come to me and say, John, I'm short a guy. I need somebody to start Saturday. And I'd say, sure, why not? They wouldn't do it now. They wouldn't. They might not even ask them, but the players wouldn't do it. They'd say, well, I can't do that. And I always felt we can adjust to whatever.
I'm a closer or a setup guy, or a middle reliever or a starter. And you also had a chance to play on a World Series championship team.
I did. That was one of the thrills, of course, of my life. It's only my 2nd year, so I almost consider myself a rookie, and to be blessed enough to be able to play in a World Series team and to come back. St. Louis had us down 3-1, and Mickey Lolich, who won 3 games in the World Series, and hooked up against Bob Gibson, who I always thought was probably the best right-handed pitcher I ever saw, and we came out on top. So it was pretty neat to be able to do that.
Let's talk about. I thought it might be fun to talk about. You know, baseball went probably 100 years without changing, and then they started to make some changes, and some occurred during your era, and some have occurred since then. One of those, of course, was the idea of the designated hitter, and that came about when you were still playing. What were your thoughts on that?
Well, I liked to bat. I was a terrible batter. I think my ERA my batting average is 0.86 or something like that. But I enjoyed that part of the game. I still like the National League part of the game, as far as there's a little more bunting, even though there's not much bunting anymore, even in the National League. But it's just it's more of a baseball game. From my pitching standpoint, I didn't like the DH because I'm facing another real good hitter, and usually one of the top 3 or 4 in the team is a DH. So from my standpoint, I didn't want to see another great hitter up there. But overall, I didn't like it. The changes, I don't know, I'm sort of flabbergasted. I'll pride myself in saying baseball never changes. After the DH, baseball pretty much just stayed the same. And then they got, you can't go into second, can't hurt anybody, can't block the plate in the home plate. So, I mean, it's just, I'm not in favor even of the reviews. I know you got to get it right, but they do things to speed up the game. They have a second clock for the pitcher who's got to throw a pitch and only can have so many visits, but you're having the reviews, and some of those reviews go 2 minutes. So I don't like some of the things that's going on.
Well, let's hope we get back to baseball and our regular routines soon. But I'll be back in 2 minutes. I'm experiencing something I never have before. Like the rest of you, I'm pretty much stuck in my home. There's nowhere to go because the governor says we need to stay home, and with few exceptions, nothing is open anyway. I came in to work to do today's show, but from here on out, it's working at home. I'm not making light of what's happening. As someone in the high-risk category because of age, I take it very seriously. But even in difficult times, we need to maintain our sense of humor. Having a positive outlook is one of the keys to good health. But if you're having problems adjusting to being home, let me offer a few suggestions to help you through this time. The key is we need to find other ways to entertain ourselves. One suggestion others have made is to walk your dog. But what if you're not a dog person? Well, my advice is to walk your cat. Hook them up on a leash and take a walk. We know that he or she isn't going to like it, but these are challenging times for all of us. Learn how to do something new. If you go online, you can find hundreds of suggestions. I did. I tried origami. I followed the instructions very carefully. I never made anything I could actually recognize. Or how about this? Are you familiar with the term binge watching? As you know, when regular television shows, you get to see your favorite programs one episode at a time when they're scheduled. With services like Netflix, Amazon, and others, every episode in a series is there for you to watch. And some people watch a whole season in one day, thus the term binge watching. So here's my suggestion. Binge watch The Ryan Report. Every episode for the past 4 years is available at uppermichigansource.com. So if you were to watch for, say, 8 hours a day, which I don't recommend because it could become addicting, but if you did, it would take you almost 2 weeks to see them all. In all seriousness, I do hope you find time to use these days productively, because a day is a terrible thing to waste. Back in a minute. Well, that's about it for this week. We hope you enjoyed looking at some interviews from the past. You know, with the coronavirus in our area, TV6 has decided to take some steps to protect all of our employees, and one of the things that they and I agree about is that I should probably do my job from home, and so that's what I'll be doing in the weeks ahead. But we will have some shows coming up for you, and I think you'll enjoy them, so continue to join us every Sunday morning. And that's it for this week. Hope to see you next Sunday morning.